You know, we talk a lot about local infrastructure on this show, things like the new I-5 bridge project and the likelihood of tolling on Oregon's roads delayed until 2026, for those of you worried about it. One project that we have not checked in on in a while is a massive freeway project near downtown Portland. It's our big story tonight. The I-5 Rose Quarter Improvement Project landed back in the headlines this week when a coalition of local activist groups sued the Oregon Department of Transportation to try to stop the project, or at least some of it. The project would expand a 1-mile stretch of I-5, adding more lanes, widening shoulders, and relocating some exit ramps. ODOT says the corridor's current design makes it a regional bottleneck and a high crash area. Crews would also add a cover on top of the freeway, sometimes called a cap or a lid, essentially turning that section of I-5 into a tunnel. Well, the project's opponents have environmental objections to widening the freeway, but they actually like the cap idea. In fact, they want ODOT to split the project in two, ditch the widening, and move forward with just the cover. Well, this all comes at a time when the cover piece has been getting a lot of attention. A few months ago, ODOT announced the federal government would provide $450 million earmarked for just the cover from a program called Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods, or RCN. Yes, that's a lot of money, but not nearly enough for the whole plan. Just last year, ODOT announced the project was essentially dead in the water due to a $1.3 billion budget gap. Setting aside the lawsuit for a moment, some questions about the plan remain, like where will the rest of that money come from? What happens if ODOT can't come up with it? And perhaps most important, is any of this ever actually going to be built? Well, to answer those questions, let's break down how we got here. Then we can dig into what might happen next. So let's wind back the clock to 2017. That's when the Oregon legislature got ODOT an initial pot of funding for the Rose Quarter and directed the agency to develop a plan to raise more money by tolling Portland freeways. Back then, ODOT's design for the Rose Quarter only included a couple of very small covers, but local advocates and elected officials were thinking bigger. They wanted the project to fix a historical wrong. Portland's Albina neighborhood was once a thriving black community, and I-5 tore it in half. You can see the damage when you compare aerial photos of that area from 1948 and from 1960. Well, the group Albina Vision Trust and other advocates wanted the Rose Quarter project to reconnect the neighborhood with a much longer cover built strong enough to support new buildings on top. In 2022, ODOT agreed to switch to the bigger cover, but the added scope of the project and pandemic-era inflation pushed the cost way up. The original estimate in 2017 was $450 million. The current estimate is between $1.5 and $1.9 billion. So the financial situation got even worse last year when Governor Tina Kotek ordered a pause on all tolling until 2026, leaving the Rose Quarter in limbo. Kotek then took it a step further, scrapping the entire plan to toll Portland freeways earlier this year, though it's worth noting that tolling is definitely still on the table for the future. That $450 million RCN grant we told you about earlier came through at around the same time earlier this year. And ODOT was quick to declare that that was enough to get the Rose Quarter plan, well, back up and running. Even though the federal money can only be used on the cover and the overall project is still about, well, $1 billion short. So what happens next? We got some answers at an Oregon Transportation Commission meeting earlier this month. ODOT officials explained they're trying to make up for the lost tolling revenues by applying for a $750 million grant from a separate federal program called Infra. They laid out 3 scenarios. Number 1, they don't get the Infra grant and have to make do with the RCN money alone. ODOT officials said that would mean they'd have enough money to build the portion of the cover south of the Broadway, but not much else. Construction would start that way in 2027. Number 2, they don't get the Infra grant, but they do get a smaller new source of revenue sometime soon, like more money from the state legislature. In that case, officials said the priority would be to get the full cover done, with most of the freeway upgrades still dropped. And number 3, they get the full Infra grant, in which case they can afford to do the cover, the extra lanes, the works. In ODOT's words, quote, the full enchilada. Well, ODOT expects to hear back on the Infra grant the next month and will come back with updated options later in the fall. And oh yeah, about that lawsuit, project opponents are moving forward, arguing the project was improperly fast-tracked through the environmental review process.
Win in this case would be just to pause the project and do a full environmental impact statement, and importantly, analyze other alternatives. So we'd like to look at a transit alternative, we'd like to look at a pricing alternative, we would like to look at a less expensive alternative.
Again, they want ODOT to ditch the extra lanes, that full enchilada, and build just the cover alone, which actually kind of sounds like what ODOT is saying it'll have to do if the infra grant doesn't work out. ODOT officials made it clear they still want to build the whole thing, but could the project's opponents end up getting their wish simply due to budget constraints? Well, it's not that simple, really. Even in ODOT's scenario 1, where they can only afford to build part of the cover, their plan still includes widening and deepening the freeway corridor underneath, which would allow for the rest of the project to be built at some point later. Joe Courtwright with the group City Observatory had harsh words for ODOT about that plan of action.
So in effect, scenario 1 is a bait and switch. You represented to the federal government that you would have a deluxe version of covers that would cover a much larger area, and you got $450 million, the largest grant in the country. And now you're proposing paring that back to just a fraction of the area that you said you would cover, and then spending the RCN money, the money the federal government gave you for covers, on widening the freeway.
Still, the cover has gone from being a small add-on in 2017 to a top priority now in 2024. It's fair to say that at least part of a cover will happen. As for that full enchilada, well, time will tell. What are your thoughts on the Rose Quarter Improvement Plan? Even if you don't drive it yourself very much, it is obviously a major economic artery through town. Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail 503-226-5090.